Thrilling Suspense Fanatic, you have found Part 3 of Karl Edward Wagner's KANE in the Dark Muse. Here are the facts you need to know before getting into this story. The poet Ompyros has met with KANE and has been seeking his advice pertaining to verses that Pyros is writing. These verses contain allusions to the history of weird literature with references to Lovecraft, to Clark Ashton Smith, to Robert E. Howard. They are a kind of stand-in for Karl Edward Wagner, placing himself within the literary canon. Of course, the poet struggles to find ideas that are truly original, but along the way, an inveterate gambler, the assistant to a local alchemist, comes by begging for money for his gambling. He says he's just on a temporary downturn, and when both KANE and the poet refuse to loan him money, he offers a certain figurine as collateral. KANE happens to know the history of the figurine, which intrigues the poet. He sees the Dark Muse as potentially offering him a way to get past his kind of writer's block, to see something truly horrible and original and bizarre. They leave the bar, and we meet up with them here in Part 3. Karl Edward Wagner's KANE in the Dark Muse, Part 3, in the hour before dawn. KANE continued to stare moodily toward the curtained doorway. It occurred to Ompyros that his fascination for the black figurine might have thrown KANE into unforeseen difficulty. After all, KANE did have frequent dealings with the alchemist, and Demetrius was almost certain to learn into whose hands the carving had fallen. "Don't worry, Eberos," KANE scoffed, when the poet voiced his concern. "Unless he has even less brains than I give him, he'll be far from Encellios before another night. His master will surely blame him for the theft, and Demetrius is most exacting in the matter of debts. More to the point, now that it's yours, what do you mean to do with the simulacrum?" But the poet had already made his decision. "As I've said, I hope to summon Clinure to follow her into the secret realm of dream. I'd be grateful if you'll show me the spell, since your knowledge of these things seems to lie far deeper than you choose to reveal. But if you're opposed, then I'll look elsewhere for the spell of evocation." "It would take little enough effort to discover," said KANE. "No, if you're certain in your mind, I'll do what you want. But there is an unknown degree of danger, and I think you may want to wait until your thoughts are somewhat clearer than tonight before you get into this too deep." "Well, I'm going to try it," Ompyros asserted. He refilled his stein with painstaking attention. "Though I think I will wait for my head to clear. I'll want my thoughts unclouded for this venture. Shall we try it tomorrow?" "Tomorrow night, if you wish," KANE agreed. "Night is the realm of Clinure. I'll see to the arrangements." "Where? Will my study do?" KANE shook his head. "I think another place would be better. Atmosphere is extremely important, and we need solitude, some place free of distractions and conflicting aurae. Dreams are influenced by the dreamer's surroundings, and the genius loci of Encellios is not conducive to the tone of the dream you seek. I think the old city is evocative of the mood you desire, and one of its abandoned temples should retain sufficient occult magnetism to facilitate communion with the Dark Muse." "The Temple of Vol yet stands," Ompyros suggested. "A warrior god of somewhat cold and prosaic nature," argued KANE. "I was thinking of the temple of Shannon. The moon goddess should favor this venture." "I didn't know her cult ever reached this far north. Where is her temple?" How can he say these things so casually? "I'll show you," the other promised, and went on to speak guardedly of Shannon's worship in the days of the old city. They talked on into the night, Levardos leaving them at one point to attend to some errand. When he returned to draw KANE aside for low conversation, Opyros discovered himself yawning. Innumerable mugs of ale had at last dulled his drug-tortured nerves, driven the ghost voices and after-images from his mind. As a matter of fact, Opyros decided, it was quite probable he was drunk. "Well, I think I'll wander back and get some rest," he announced, smothering a belch. "Or is that backwards? Should I concentrate on staying awake, maybe, so I can sleep tomorrow night?" "No, get some rest," KANE told him. "If we succeed with the evocation, there'll be no need to lie asleep. Klinure herself will lead you beyond the gates of dream." "Well, then, till tomorrow evening," drawled the poet, fumbling to fasten the folio. The onyx figurine he had already restored to its wrappings and secured at his belt. "Wait, I'll accompany you," KANE offered. He signed for his men to follow. "Should by chance you run into Eberos, you might find the greasy tub of guts ungrateful for the steak you gave him tonight." It could not be far from dawn, KANE noted, as they left Stanchek's. The skies had not grayed perceptibly, but the stars were beginning to dim. It was cold, very quiet. Crisp night air was stunning to inhale after the close, smoky atmosphere of the tavern. Few were abroad. It was an hour of the night when even those who disdained sleep went about their business within doors. Certainly it was not the time of day KANE might expect a beggar to accost him. They heard her sobbing wail through the darkness, and shortly came the shuffling sound of her step. Then, through the island of a rare streetlight, they saw her approach, drawn by the flame of the torch Hagen carried. "Please, kind gentlemen, please, can you spare a coin for a poor mother? A coin for a poor mother and her child." She was not old, though her sordid rags and haggard face made her appear twice her years. A baby, so enswathed in rags as to seem no more than a shapeless bundle, nursed at her breast, his face buried by her shawl. Hagen moved to shove her away, but not liking the mad glare of her eyes, he turned to let her pass. "KANE, KANE, is it truly my Lord KANE?" she moaned, pressing nearer to him. "Ah, KANE, you'll spare a coin to help this poor mother and her sickly babe. He has food, but I've none, and soon my babe must seek his food elsewhere, unless this poor mother has coin to buy bread and meat." KANE thought her face familiar, though too pale and drawn to place the memory. "Why do you beg at the most desolate hour of the night?" he murmured, digging his fingers into his almoner. "I cannot mingle with the crowds by day. They drive me from the streets when honest folks see me," she whined. "The guard takes no pity on a poor mother and her son." There was a heavy stench about her, a foulness less squalid than charnel. Though his fingers touched smaller coins, a whim moved KANE to place a gold sarmka in the woman's emaciated hand. It would buy food and shelter for several months. "May Lord Throalet spread his wings to guard you, KANE," she blessed him, clutching the coin as if to crush it. She pressed closer. KANE saw the baby's face and knew the reason for her pallor. Her voice lowered. "As you pass the corner, there are 8 men who wait in an alley. 2 have crossbows. They speak of KANE." Swiftly she slipped past them, crooning to her babe. She must have shifted him to her other breast, for he gave a brief cry, more a snarl than a whimper. KANE heard a troubled fluttering noise, suggestive of the flap of leathery wings. Then the only sound was the mother's crooning fading into the night. "Strange," remarked Opyros. "She blessed you with the name of a demon." "She spoke of an ambush," said Levardos, who had stood close enough to overhear. "Should we get more men, or take another street?" "Thoum's horns, it's that bastard Eberos. He'd know to waylay us on the street that leads to Opyros's manor." "So I was thinking," growled KANE. But if it isn't Eberros, I want to know who it is that dares this. No, we won't waste time returning for more men. If they've seen our torch, they'll grow suspicious and change positions. Since we know where they're waiting, the trap can be reversed." "They outnumber us, and they've got crossbows," pointed out Weber. "I don't pay you just to hear you blow on those pipes," KANE returned. Hagen threw an arm over his brother's shoulders. "Nah, don't you worry, little brother. I'll save a little one for you." Weber grinned and pushed him away. "Careful with that damn torch." "Keep your voices down," KANE snarled. "Let's not pause any longer or they might start wondering. I'll circle around and take care of the crossbows. Meanwhile, walk slowly toward the corner with the torch so that they can see the light coming. Stop before you get there. Opyros, give a yell that you dropped the carving, and the rest, go back with the light and make a show of looking for it. That should give me time to reach the alley from the other side. Come fast when I yell." Seeing they understood, KANE slipped away into the night, loping as fast as he dared without making noise. "He sees in the dark like a cat," muttered Livardos, as he vanished into the deep shadow. Ancelios was not laid out according to any orderly pattern, but its winding avenues did intersect with equally haphazard cross-streets, and islands of property lay between. This particular segment was given over to shops and small dwellings, often combined, with a center courtyard. The alley where the attackers lurked gave access to this courtyard, a squalid wilderness of refuse heaps, small vegetable plots, and animal pens. Rapidly, KANE picked his way around the block of buildings. His course seemed reckless, but his senses were keenly alert for any sign of danger. He kept to the obscurity of the outward projecting walls, where not even the dim luminance of the stars could reach, moving swiftly with no more sound than a shadow. His was the greatest risk, but KANE cared not to trust this job to any of his men. The silent snarl of a stalking predator touched KANE's lips, and anger stirred a blue flame in his killer's eyes. Abruptly, he halted before a locked door. This building, he recalled, had stood vacant for some months. A heavy padlock secured the door, placed there more to keep out squatters than thieves, since the building contained little of value. For one of KANE's massive strength, it would take little effort to force the door, tear the lock from its brackets. But there would be noise, and the city lay in silence. From his boot, KANE produced a thin metal pick. In a moment, the lock fell open. Cautiously, he pushed open the door and let himself into the empty shop. Silence and dust and soft scurryings were all that greeted him. With a stealthy stride, KANE pushed through the empty rooms and into the storeroom at its rear. Another door opened onto the courtyard. A heavy wooden bar was jammed in place, so that he had to twist it free before drawing it clear. Its creaking complaint sounded like an explosion in the pre-dawn stillness, but KANE doubted if it carried to those in the alley. Thinking about the crossbows, he wiped spit over the hinges, then inched the door open soundlessly, far enough to glide through. No unseen shaft streaked towards him. Thankful for the jumbled litter of the courtyard, KANE stole past the doorway and dropped low against the ground. So far as he could discern, no enemy lurked within the square. Taking advantage of the spotty cover, he crossed the intervening ground, moving with unerring speed despite the darkness and the obstacle-strewn yard. At the mouth of the alley, his caution doubled. Dimly he could see the figures crouched at the far end, not more than 60 feet from him. At least a couple were turned in his direction, but they had not observed his stealthy approach. KANE's unnatural night vision enabled him to make out the two men who waited with crossbows cocked. Their attention was fixed on the approach of his men, whose voices came through the night, else they might have sensed the death that stole upon them from behind. KANE stepped into the alley. From either boot he drew a knife, 2 flat blades balanced for throwing. His left arm moved with the blurring speed of a striking cobra. In almost the same instant, his right arm uncoiled with the same lethal precision. To the lurking assailants, it was as if a murderous phantom had risen in their midst. Dull impacts and frightened death howls marked the flight of the knives as the 2 crossbowmen staggered under the agony that pierced their backs, stumbled into the street to die. Released by the spasm of their fingers, the iron-fanged bolts skittered a trail of sparks across the darkened pavement. With a feral yell, KANE tore out his sword with his left hand and leapt into the alley. His opponents had waited in darkness. Only dimly could they glimpse the looming death that burst upon them. Steel flashed and clangored. Another of the lurkers was hurled aside with a mangled chest, never knowing his killer's face. Then someone flung open a dark lantern, hidden behind some rubble. In the thick darkness, its glare was dazzling. In that instant, the 5 startled assassins saw that only one man stood against them. And in the heartbeat it took them to realize who their enemy was, KANE's blade snaked toward the throat of another opponent, and then there were only 4. Bringing up their blades, the 4 rushed upon him. The first to meet them lost his sword and his arm with it. He fled screaming into the night, a spattered trail marking his flight. Then KANE's blade was engaged by a more skillful swordsman than his fellows, so that KANE fought with furious speed to keep the other 2 from striking past his guard. Only the long knife he wielded with his right arm turned back their desperate thrusts. But in a matter of seconds, his men had gained the alley. A lethal tide of steel, they surged into the melee. Levardos quickly dispatched one of the would-be ambushers as KANE beat aside the swordsman's stubborn guard to thrust his heavy blade through the man's heart. The remaining assailant fled into the courtyard, Weber and Hagen close behind. A clamor of overturned litter, howl of agony, and the brothers returned looking satisfied.
"I don't suppose you planned to keep him alive so I could question him,"
panted KANE. The brothers each one pointed to the other, claiming he had struck the death blow, then fell into a fit of laughter.
"Never mind, KANE,"
announced Levardos, holding the torch over an upturned face. It was the last man KANE had killed.
"This was that Walden bodyguard Eberros had with him at Stanjek's."
KANE grunted.
"The puke-blooded whore's son used some of his gold to hire these sewer rats to waylay us. Must have guessed Opyros wouldn't go back alone. By Thoum, this won't be the last of our quarrel."
Here we mostly establish KANE as an absolute badass. And hey, why not? It's a sword and sorcery story. How about some sword? I don't think there's much more to say aside from the kind of allusion to demonhood or to a past. What was that baby anyways? What was seen? What's up with that beggar girl? I'm not sure. It's interesting that we touched down on that incident so briefly and then just moved along. What do you guys think? Anyways, as always, leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and be aware that my own work is for sale. That's right. In the description below, you can see links not only to the other parts of this story, but to a shop with Thrilling Suspense Fantasy in it. Show me you're down by picking up some work. You'll like it. All right. Catch you next time.